Cool. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. We're going to do a webinar more often on this SFTP setup. So this is the first one we're doing. So we'll record this one, and then we'll obviously we'll be making sure everything is hunky-dory the way you want it, and we're going to ask lots of questions with you guys. There's only about 12 or 14 of us, so we're not going to be shy today. We can ask anything you want. You can interrupt me. You can do whatever you need to do. And I don't want to move on to another slide unless you know exactly what we're doing, and anything that you have any doubts about or want to sort out or ask a question, you can put your hand up straight away and we'll wait for you and you can ask the question. So it's going to be a very casual webinar. It's going to be very interactive. I want to know what you think of it. Also want to know, I want to make sure that when you walk away, that when you go to the client, you're not going to be worried about how to do it, because obviously your first SFTP installation might be a bit complicated for you and you might be a bit nervous, and you want to make sure that when you go there, you're not going to get stuck and look silly, which is what we all don't want to do on computers. I think that's pretty normal. Okay, so we've set up a step-by-step way of setting up the SFTP. This is nothing to do with the product itself, to do with the SFTP setup. The only product that's changed in this setup is the RecXpress side. The FTP side is totally transparent. There's no changes really in the system, excepting that you might want to have a few settings that you need to know how they work. But all you're going to be doing on the FTP side, the EFT side, is you're going to enter a batch and cache book. And that's all you need to know. And you all know how to do that already. So you'll just be entering a cache book batch and posting it. Because once you've set up the FTP, the SFTP side, you never have to revisit that. It stays the same forever. Okay, so it's really only on the cache book side that you need to know once you've done the SFTP. So the user will have no learning curve required. There's a minimal amount of learning curve. That is when they post the batch, we provisionally post it, waiting for the bank to give us a response. That's about the only thing that they might need to know, and maybe to look at the error report if they don't get a full batch and they get an error batch, and how to change them. But all the rest is miscellaneous codes, the bank setup, the batch setup, all of that's the same. Nothing changes, and that is the beauty of this new system. Okay, so the very important part is that you guys know how to go in there and set up the SFTP correctly for them. And that's you're going to do. They're not going to get involved at all because you don't want them to worry about it. And once you leave, they're going to be running. It's that simple. Then the bank takes over from there and does all the dirty work for you. Okay, so you interrupt me if I'm in the middle of a slide. Just say, what do you mean? Why are you doing that? I've got Azakiwe sitting, listening very carefully in the background. He's going to keep adding notes and creating a knowledge base as we go along. So we cover everything with you. And so you are first training people. So don't be scared to ask any questions because everything's relevant in this. Okay, so let's start. Are you running the slides now, Natalie? Yeah, you are. Okay, so let's just go to straight into this and let's get it done. Okay, so this is the beginning. So what you'll do is you'll walk into the client will get a hold of the bank manager, and he will then, the bank manager will then coordinate with the necessary people in the background that are needed in this. Okay, and what we've done there is, bless you, what we've done there is we've set up a knowledge base for any of the banks that we've got online already. And the knowledge base will tell you what you need to do, what the client needs to do, and to who to contact in that bank. Okay, so that is going to be for each bank. So far, we've got Standard Bank, we've got Nedbank, and as they come on board, we'll create new knowledge bases. We're going to do ABSA next, and then FNB, okay, which is the four main banks. Banks that are sitting in Singapore, for example, if they have this facility, you will ask the bank if they do, or the client will, and then straight away we'll ask you for one or two things, because all the banks around the world do this host-to-host solution. They're just slightly different how they deal with the response files. Again, we will then get hold of the bank with you, do the interface for you, and get it up and running as soon as possible. Maybe the first installation will be online with you to help you with that bank and with the client. But once that bank's on board, we will have a knowledge base for the next person, for the next people that want to interface with that bank. Okay, so let's just go here for the first 4 steps. On the first 4 steps, I'm going to ask Natalie or and Wayne with backup to actually explain to you what each step does, and you can then ask questions between each step or when she's reached the end. And let me, before I introduce Natalie and Wayne, this is the part which generates the actual keys that the bank normally requires to whitelist the IP addresses that you're going to be using. Cool. Okay, and this requires no installation. It's already available in the Windows environment. You just got to run it from the DOS command prompt. Okay, Natty, Wayne, which one of you would like to take over from here?
I'll go for it. I'll take the plunge. Okay,
take the plunge. Good luck,
Natalie. As Bob says, you can run this straight from your command prompt. As did it yesterday, and it worked smoothly, very quickly. By the time you get it right, you can do it within 5 minutes, in my opinion. So step 1 would be open command prompt, and you would generate the public key using a specific prompt, which I'm going to show you now. You would then, step 2, specify where to put the key file. Step 3, you then just enter a password for the key. This is optional. You can, it's only if required. Wayne, you can jump in if I'm getting it wrong. And step 4, you then retrieve the keys from the path specified in step 2. So firstly, please ignore that it says step 2 in the top there. It should be saying step 1. So there's the command prompt that you would use, which is ssh-keygen space-m space PEM. You enter that, and that will then generate the public and private key. Step 2 would be to then specify where to put the key file. Upon the prompt, enter a file path, for example, C drive C:/ /SFTP keys /John Smith /ID _RSA. Press enter and your keys will be generated. You then would have the option to enter a passphrase. Enter a password when prompted and press enter. Confirm the password by entering it again and pressing enter. If a password is not required, you just press enter and confirm by pressing enter again. So you generally, if you do not want to use a passphrase, you just hit enter and you can move on.
Okay, I'll jump in here quickly,
yes,
Natalie.
Go for it.
That passphrase is normally determined by the bank. They'll say whether they need a key with a passphrase or without.
Cool.
So the client will get that info from the bank. The bank will say we need a public key with password, and then they would have to enter the password here.
Okay, and this kind of information we will put in the knowledge base that Bob has mentioned per bank, which I can show you when I'm done showing these steps. Okay, then you would acknowledge the key creation. Upon completion, you will receive a message indicating that the key was successfully created. And then you navigate.
So I'll go for it. Sorry.
Then finally, go to the specified path where you specified where to put the keys, and you will see your public key, which is the ID _RSA .pub, and your private key is the ID _RSA.
Cool. So what would you do with these keys, Natalie?
Okay, so then you then link it
to your. To the bank?
No. No. So what you do is you link it to your Rebex. Well, we use Rebex. There are a few other options, but what we use is Rebex to create the actual SFTP connection. So this is Rebex. I can't remember the URL, but I'm going to link it in the document properly later. So you go to Rebex, you download Rebex, and you go through their steps to install. Once installed, you will then have to do just six easy steps to create a SFTP user connection. Okay,
and
so
can I quickly interrupt, Natalie?
Go for it.
Just to clarify there, if the client has a bank that wants or has the SFTP server on the bank machine, and there are some banks that are like that, in other words, they don't want to connect to a client's SFTP server, they say we've got our own, then the client need not worry anything about this SFTP software. All they will do is provide the public key to the bank, and the bank will set it up for them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, Wayne, and is that you wouldn't use Rebex?
Yeah, you wouldn't use any SFTP server. Really, the bank will take care of that for you.
Yeah.
We've preferred having our own SFTP server for obvious reasons, because we've got separate servers for our development environment, and because it's our machine, we can jump on there and we can see the movement of files in and out and have tighter control. But some banks won't allow that, and if they have it on their machine, it's actually easier for the client. There's none of this SFTP server setup required, other than what Natalie's going to explain now.
Okay, so let me, before you go any further, so what you basically, to summarize that, is that the bank will then tell you they either have the SFTP site on their server or on the client. You can then have a choice to have it on the client. To make it easier for the client, you would then maybe go with the bank server, because you wouldn't have to do any more work except send the keys to the bank. Am I right or wrong?
That's 100% correct.
Sounds probably more practical in a client's environment. Us, we the developers, so we wanted to see the file moving, and we also wanted to see what type of file it was creating. The other thing that's an advantage to the client is if they go into the server that is on the bank side, there's no worry about security on their side. Nobody can look at the file, find the file, change the file. Go straight to the bank, and there's no influence from anybody that can intercept that file on the client side and maybe change it and commit fraud. So that's actually a very good way of keeping the security much tighter from the point of the client. Okay. So before we move on to Rebex, does anybody have any questions on this? Because it's very important. Okay. For example, the program that we're running there is built into Windows. So there's no Rebex, there's nothing. So any questions before we move on to the Rebex side, which is now creating the actual SFTP on your side? Any questions? Silence. So obviously everybody can do this. It's pretty straightforward. I don't think it needs any more explanation on that side. Brilliant. Okay, right. Do you want to just go through Rebex with us, Natalie, in case you want to do the SFTP on your side?
Yeah. So as Bob said, this is if you're going to do the SFTP from your side. So what you would first do is you would install Rebex, create a connection, and you then use their supply URL, which is I think it's localhost. It's a localhost URL, and you go and you log in. And the first thing you will do is add a new user. Then you will fill in the authentication settings, add a public key, which is the key that we've just created. You then set a virtual path, which is the path where, Wayne, you might have to correct me here, but it is the path where anything connected to that user, all your files will go to that specified path. Then you do the yes.
Yeah, 100%. Anyone in the network will, business will understand that you set up you map the path to the incoming IP address on the SFTP server. So any connections coming in from all the client machines won't go anywhere other than that exact directory, where they can either drop off files or pick up files. That's part of the beauty of SFTP security.
Okay, and then I have a question for you, Wayne. At what point would you then whitelist your IP address? Would it you don't have to whitelist it yet? Is it only when you get to the bank's connection?
Yeah, that's only when you actually start testing, uploading, and downloading with the bank. The bank would need your server machine's IP address that they can connect from their side, and you'd have to whitelist their incoming IP address onto your machine.
Okay, and that's the IP address that you will set up with this user.
On the machine that's hosting this SFTP server, yeah.
Okay, cool. So then step 5 is
just hold on. Sorry, just to mention one more thing about the whitelisting. Normally what you do when you do a secure server, you have a certificate, which is makes it HTTPS, for example, or makes it SFTP. The thing is, with the SFTP server you don't have to create any certificates, because you're going to give it to the bank, and the bank will actually put it onto their list of secure SFTP sites. And that's what they call whitelisting. So when they whitelist it, they're putting it into their list of secure sites, and it doesn't need any more security than that. Okay.
Great. So once you create the virtual path setting, you then select the SSH settings, and you would then update the user. Now I'm going to show it in more detail now. So what we've done is we've also compared it using our actual EFT SFTP setup screen, so that you can actually see how Rebex is linking with your user settings. So the first thing you would do on Rebex is add a new user, and the username that you're going to enter is the user that you will use in your SFTP setup. Okay, step 2 is the authentication settings. Now this does vary on the selected SFTP setup. So for instance, in this screen, we are setting up an SFTP connection with two-factor authentication. You can also do SFTP with password or SFTP with key file. For this, the authentication settings, enabled or disabled, this option is to enable or disable password authentication for the user. If it is required, this means that the password is then required. This is the option you select when setting up two-factor authentication, as you can see in our EFTXpress setup screen. Then the last setting you would choose is the local password. This is the password associated with the user account for authentication when connecting to the server. Wayne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this would be optional unless you are using two-factor authentication, correct?
Yeah, 100% correct. So it just depends on how that SFTP server on the left, sorry, the graphic on the left there, it just depends what those fields are saying required or not required. Then you would then have to enter it on our side or not.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, let me interrupt again.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, just briefly, if you go into the bank on their SFTP side, okay, and they will tell you what authentication they need on your side. So normally it's just a username and password on your side. Am I correct?
Yeah. Well, sorry, Natalie, I'll tell you that we're busy now in the talking stages with apps and that, and they just wanted a user with a password. They didn't even want a key. So it really comes down to the bank. So whatever the bank determines, we just follow suit with our software here. And it doesn't get any more complicated than those fields you've seen there. So the slight complication here, just to reiterate, is that the screen on the left is for clients that want to set up their own SFTP server. If you deal with a bank, you don't have to deal with that at all. They'll tell you this is the username, this is the password, and you've got the keys. You'd enter that info here, save it, test it, and you'd be in.
Okay. Okay, and we will put that in the knowledge base per bank. So we will tell you the bank offers this or that, and you can then determine what you'd like to do with the bank. But the bank, for example, Standard Bank only offer SFTP on their side. So that'll be in the knowledge base telling you Standard Bank SFTP only for that bank. Okay.
Great. Move on.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, next we have the public key authentication, which is you are now taking the key that you've created in the using Windows command prompt, and you are now linking it to this user. So there are a few options where it's enabled or disabled. This option is to enable or disable the public key authentication for the user. If it is set to required, then this means that the password is also required. This is the option you would wait, sorry. I think this little section is a bit incorrect. Am I right, Wayne? Because
no,
if it's required,
100%. I can just say here that the SFTP server, whether it's your own SFTP server or the bank, will get, of the two keys that you created, it would need the public key. And in your EFTXpress screen there on the right, you would then link it to the directory containing your private key. So the server's got the public, you've got the private, and the two together unlock and form like a handshake contract and allow transfer files.
Okay, and my question is, if it's SFTP with key file, would that also not have to be selected as required? Not just 2FA.
No, public key, it would be required as well.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I must just add that there. Sorry, guys. And then you would select add public key, and you add the public key by selecting add public key, going to your machine, browsing for where the ID_RSA.pub key is, and you link it to this user. Any questions?
I'll just quickly say
obviously it sounds more complicated than
it actually
sounds
is.
complicated, but it's really just copying files across. It really just copying the file in the right place, going with step by step, using this guide will be able to let you set up. But again, you might want to go with the client, go to the server on the bank side, which is much more simple. Go for it, Wayne.
Yeah, is exactly what I wanted to say. It does seem a bit complicated and a lot to do here, but it's not. There's about 4 key things you need to provide either to your own SFTP server or the banks, and that's the password, the key if required, the password if required. That's it, and you're in. Also, noting that this software we're looking at here is Rebex, but there's quite a few other packages around the world. The client can choose whatever they want to have to host a SFTP server if they want. So our examples are relative and referring to Rebex only. They will have maybe a different layout, but they'll ask for the same information.
Right, you can carry on now.
Cool. Okay, so the virtual path settings, this is the virtual directory for the user. As mentioned, this is where this specific user would, all the files would be sent to. For example, we have we've created a path called on our C drive called FTP secure /RecXpress user, and all the files that are sent via this SFTP connection will go in there. In our actual EFT setup, we can specify within that path. So the upload directory in this case is CPS /out, and the response directory, which is where the response file will be sent to, is CPS in. Wayne, would you like to add anything?
That upload and that response directory that the bank will provide. They'll say, fine, no matter where the SFTP server is, we need this directory under it with the out and the in. So in this case, it's corporate payment system out and in.
Yeah.
So just into what the bank tells you.
So the first section of the path is on the left there, which is what you put into Rebex. And that section of the path is up to you to decide where you want to put that file. But then they will want within that file path their own in and out files. Now, the out file is the file that uploads. So we will send the file automatically to the out path. The bank knows it's called CPS /out and picks up the file from there. It then posts the batch onto their mainframe using a queuing system, whatever they use on their system, and updates the bank and updates your account and posts the actual creditors transactions or whatever they are, or the checks, okay? And then it then sends back a file that tells us what records were posted, what weren't. For example, in the bank accounts, invalid branch codes will go into tell us that those certain entries never went through. And they will come back into what we call the response file. And that response file is put into the in directory. Okay. We'll tell you at the end of this very briefly what happens with us and our batch, but not much does happen except we create an error batch with the response file, if necessary, or we post the whole batch depending on how the client has set up their own requirements. Okay. But we'll do that at the end. I'll just give you a short explanation. Cool. You can carry on that.
Cool. Okay, so lastly in your setup, you're going to have your authorization settings. For your main user, which would be your administrator, you must ensure that you have web administration access. This is so that you can revisit that link. Otherwise, you won't be able to log back in. We experienced this yesterday where we, by mistake, created our first initial user and we didn't include web administration access and we are now locked out. So I highly recommend please clicking that checkbox. With the SSH shell settings, these must be set to default. Maybe Wayne can go into a bit more detail with that.
Yeah, I can't actually. That's the whole crux of SFTP is that SSH. But basically, rule of thumb is you leave all the defaults as the vendor provides it for you, and you just change what you need to change. So we in this screen we need user password, mapped path, key to whatever, and that's all you change. So leave the default settings.
Great. And then finally, you would, of course, select update user, and your user will then be created. Now, what we've also done is to show you how this also relates to the RecXpress SFTP setup screen. Okay.
Stop. Okay, I just want you to go backwards for a second. Just go back to our, go one more, go back. Okay, just briefly, I want to, before we go into RecX, I want to just quickly go through a few more options here to explain to you just a bit more detail what we've done here, because there's a few things here that you wouldn't really know without being told. First of all, we have an archive directory, and that archive directory is what happens is when we download or get the response file, we want to keep it just in case the user has a problem or a discrepancy. And we keep that in the archive directory. Again, that archive directory will be anywhere on your computer as long as you have access to it and read and write rights. The point there is we want to be able to open that if the client has a problem. For example, they might say, oh, the batch didn't come through, or oh, we didn't get a response file, or oh, we deleted something. We can then pick up that file and look at exactly what came back from the bank and make sure that everything is correct. Okay, that is the one option we've given you. So that archive directory is a nice thing to have. And you must remember that's where all your response files goes in. So if you have a batch, so what happens is we create a batch. You create the batch, the user posts the batch. Okay, we then flag it as provisionally posted. Okay, the bank then will then process the information and in its own time will send back a response file. This can vary between 5 minutes and can also vary up to 15 minutes depending on when you post the batch. So if you post in a very high traffic time, for example, like 5 minutes before the end of day, it could be a bit intense and take a bit longer to come back. Okay, so if there's no response file for like an hour, which we've never had this happen, the bank didn't send a response file, okay, we allow the user to override the actual provisional posted batch. And that is where we've got the override response time required on the right-hand side there. And you can say, if no response file has been received within an hour, there's something wrong. So therefore, we let the user override the response. This should never happen. So I wouldn't really want that for you to switch it on, because we normally want to ask the bank, where was the response file? You know, because we can't allow checks to go through, or payments to go through twice, or didn't go through, etc. Okay, so we've got to be very careful with that. Okay, the next option there is, I can't read that, it's too small. Post, what's that next option there?
Post multiple EFT batches.
Okay, so we've also realized that sometimes when you create EFT batches, you might only want to do one at a time, okay? And by doing one at a time, that means you know that there's enough money in the bank. And once they've posted that, you can make sure that the process was completed and that the bank balances are correct, okay? So therefore, for them to post more than one batch at a time, we thought it's a bit risky because the first batch could affect the second batch. So we allow you to switch off posting multiple batches. Again, it's up to the user to decide if they want to do that. But that's a 99%er. You know, the 100%er is one batch at a time. And the 99% is multiple batches at the same time. Okay, again, for the reasons I'm mentioning, there could be other errors that come, like running out of a balance, etc. But again, it will create an error batch and would not influence the situation at all for you. Okay, but that again, you can ask the user what they prefer. Okay, and now we also have an auto post using a timer. So what happens is, if you post one batch at a time, we allow you to keep batch list open, and a batch list then will keep looking for the response file automatically. And that means the user doesn't have to go back and then post the batches, because what could happen is people might want to create the batch, post the batch to the bank, then the manager wants to authorize those batches. And what they like to do is they like to log into the bank themselves. They don't like to go via this because they've been used to doing it via the bank. They go look at the bank transactions. They then approve the batches, okay, and then post the batch. Now, If that's the case, you wouldn't want to auto post using a timer, because you might post the batch at 9 o'clock in the morning, but then the manager during his lunch break goes and approves the batch. So that's like 3 hours later. So what would happen then is he'd approve the batch, and then the user at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon would go and post the batch in Cashbook from the provisional status to a posted status. Okay, so you wouldn't want to use a timer. But if you don't do that and you want to make sure that the batch is posted straight away, okay, you then use our auto timer, and that will then keep looking for a response file. As soon as it finds a response file, it then takes the provisional post batch and posts the batch. Okay, so those are two scenarios that you can work with the client and decide what you want to do with that. Okay, and the timer can go up to like a couple of hours and wait for something. The thing is, it's based on the batch list being opened and not closed. Okay, what we also do is we write the batches that haven't been posted to your scheduler. So when you go into to log in, or wherever you are doing something in AppBank, in Sage 300, the schedule will pop up and tell you there are unposted batches in EFT waiting to be processed. Okay, which is also a nice little feature, so people don't forget to post their provisional batches. But you can understand there will be a time between when the batch is posted from the system. When the batch is posted from the system, okay, let me just put them on mute. Okay, so yeah, there is a time when the batch is processed from the system, then to be picked up by the bank and posted on the bank side. That can take 10 minutes or whatever. And then the response file. So there can be a bit of timing there involved, where there's a response file only after 10 minutes. And also there could be a delay in the response file because the manager has not approved the transactions themselves using the bank approval system that they're using. Okay. So before we move on to RecXpress, I really want to know, there's a lot of information we've given you there. You can see that using the bank's SFTP is easier. You might want to set up your own SFTP for your company using our system, because you might want to use it yourselves. And then you might want to use your own SFTP just to understand how it works, to get a feeling of how the files are processed. But I would guarantee this, I will say one thing: when you're using the system and you've set up the system like this, you will want to just use your own and use Cashbook from there onwards, because you don't have to export a file, you don't have to upload the file to the bank, importing it again, the bank, and then submitting, and then whatever. It's much more transparent using the system. My Murti, as I said, uses it here for Peresoft. She goes in, she creates the batches in Cashbook, she posts them. 5 minutes later, she goes and gets a response file, and the batches get posted into the Cashbook, and everything's hunky-dory. And there are two advantages to that. And the very first advantage is when you enter a batch into Cashbook, you've already done the allocation, you've already done the tax, you've already done the vendor, and everything else. We also retrieve, obviously, from AP. So you can then go to AP, post the batch in AP, it goes into the Cashbook batch, post the batch in Cashbook, and it then goes to the SFTP automatically. Again, it's processed correctly, it's allocated correctly. There's no more interference from the user. You don't have to worry about now retrieving the statement and setting up a rule. No rules required. You've done the allocations. It's all done. It's all authorized. That is one of the most easiest parts of this new system that is done. It's one entry, one allocation, one post. And it's all done within Cashbook. Nothing externally. Nothing in RecX, nobody else. It's all done internally, which is a very nice thing. And the other thing that's a huge advantage is that if the person that does all your processing and does all your payments in your company, what happens is if they go on holiday, you've now got to get somebody else to go into your bank and do this. This way, you don't have to. You just have to be trained up on the Cashbook side how to do it, and then they just do the batches. So there's no extra user required to go and have bank authentication and bank logging in. It's also, so I've got Murti doing my payments, and when she goes on leave, Samantha can quite happily go and learn how to enter a batch and do my payments for me without any more effort. And those are the huge advantages of the new system. And I really recommend that you set it up in your own company, to be honest with you. Because once it's done, it's transparent. You never have to do this again. Okay. So before I move on to RecX, any questions? Oh, you guys are good, eh? You see, we're the best in the world. There's no doubt. We know our stuff, eh? Yeah. No questions. Okay. Look, as you use it, let me just say one more thing. When you start using this and you want more clarity, just give us a shot. We're quite happy to have a quick webinar with you. Teams, we can meet, take 20 minutes privately with you, learn a bit of stuff together, etc. Okay. And really, we're quite happy. We're open to anything you need. Great. Okay. There's no hands up. No, nothing.
Mike
Yes,
Stewart is asking a question.
go for it.
Natalie, I just wanted to confirm that username you've got on the screen. On the left, it's RecXpress user. On the right, it's NetBank test user.
Yes,
They need to be the same.
They do need to be the same.
They
It's
do need
just
to be.
Wayne.
Well spotted, Mike. I actually made a mental note to say to Natalie afterwards, but that must be the same user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to give
Thanks.
you
Let me just
reference, yeah, these screens were put
let
together
me
very
interrupt
fast
all
this
of you.
morning.
I know. I woke up this morning at 9 o'clock and I said, show me your screens. And she showed me the screens. I said, I want the whole thing redone.
So hence why some of the steps look a bit funny and the screens might not be matching, but I will be improving
But
this
we
slideshow.
Thanks. Thank you.
definitely. I mean, you saw number one was number two, and number
Oh,
two.
my word.
We are.
I mean, I'm looking at
typical
the
Bobby
forward
Perel,
slash. I'm
Mike.
looking at the forward slash right now, the
Um,
CPS forward slash out. I mean, that's not even a proper file path.
Right.
and typical Bobby Perel, hey, Mike. I mean, I'm innocent. Let's be honest. I'm innocent.
Oh,
I'm a
innocent,
nice
yes.
guy. Why would
Still
I
trying
put
to
them
catch
into
my
a
breath.
stress situation if I can't avoid it? You know what I mean? Come on.
So you will see, Mike, when we get to the RecXpress screens, that will match
Okay, great.
the Rebex the Rebex screen.
See the problem. You see the problem is with Mike. He's too damn observant. Okay.
Thanks, Mike, for pointing out all the things I've been staring at the whole time. Really appreciate it.
It's called years of experience. You know, it was quite funny when I went to the conference yesterday. The one person said, "Why are we not going to the cloud more quickly?" And the person said, "Well, the older people like this, they don't like change, and they know that the system on the desktop works better. But the young people like all the all the fancy bits." And I thought, you've just insulted 90% of the audience, calling us old. How dare you?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it was quite funny. Anyway, okay, cool. So we now go to RecXpress. Okay, so I'm going to just
It
quickly
doesn't match
before
the
we.
screens, but okay. Yeah.
But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Okay, we'll
Okay,
move
so
on.
this is now the Rec. So let me quickly, before you start, Natalie,
Yes.
let me quickly just tell them what happened here, because it's quite important. And that is when we did the EFT side, I then realized that we can do this on the RecXpress side. And instead of having a bank feed, which I wasn't happy with because the bank feeds we were getting were not giving us all the details we wanted. It was limited. It was using another product that would go and read the bank feed from from the screen. It just wasn't what I wanted in the bank feeds. And also we were having problems with Popia. People had to have these huge contracts to have a bank feed linking to an accounting program. And thirdly, it wasn't consistent with the Sage 300 bank feeds. I mean, I could go to the bank feed in 300, but when I went to NetBank, it would just hang and didn't go anywhere, and there was no control over that. So what I thought was, we've got the SFTP going with the bank to the bank. Does the bank offer the other way around for the bank statement? And we did discover they do. And what they do is they give the user the option of being able to receive a statement every day. In fact, they can receive a statement every 20 minutes, but it can be daily. It can also be every 15 or 20 minutes. And what we've now done is we've built in the same SFTP form where we will then retrieve the bank statement from the SFTP path and bring it into RecXpress into a temporary space daily. And then when you're ready to do your month end, you can then select a date range for your month end. And then retrieve those statements directly into RecXpress. Okay, so you will be retrieving statements daily, and we will then keep them in a temporary file until you want to use them. The beauty of this is no more downloading of statements, exporting of statements, worrying about if they're the right statements. Did you do the right date range? Did you get the right statements in? This is now done automatically for you. We also check for duplicates. We also check for statement file names that are duplicated, and it's much, much tighter. No interference by the user. All they do is click one button. We are looking at the next version where we will have a timer, and you will be able to set the timer. We're either going to do it in the services, or we're going to do it in another program. And that timer will then retrieve the statements for you automatically. So you wouldn't even have to go and log into RecXpress and retrieve them. Okay, so let's just quickly summarize. The bank sends up the statement into the SFTP, again, either their SFTP or yours, depending on what you prefer. RecXpress will retrieve that into the temporary area or into a temporary space every day. And then when you're ready to do your month end, you can then say move it from the temporary space into RecXpress, okay, from a date range that you will choose. Okay, so for example, if I'm doing October and I'm in the middle of November, I would then say retrieve from the 1st of October until the 31st of October to RecXpress, then do the RecXpress itself. So when we did this, we went one step further. We thought, okay, we can now retrieve the statement automatically from the bank, but not individually. Let's do it together. So what we've done is we've built a grid. It was always there, but nobody really used it because it was a bit more, not complicated is the wrong word. It wasn't as user-friendly as this is. So what you can now do is you can set up 100 banks, 200 banks, whatever you want, current accounts. I know that most banks, most companies have at least 5 current accounts, okay, 2 CFC accounts, whatever. You can then set up those accounts all in the grid, hit one button, and it retrieves all the statements together, one shot, puts them into the temporary files. Then at the end of the month, you can then look at all those files together, setting up your date range for each bank, and hit the button, it retrieves them straight into RecXpress together, one button. Okay, you then go into each of the statements, maybe check that the others correct, check your rules are correct. Remember, using the FTP now, your rules will be minimized. You wouldn't have to worry about everything because they'll just be matched to the existing transactions in your cash book. Okay, and you'll have a few others left over. Check your VAT's correct on a few transactions in the other that they set up correctly. Okay, then go back to your grid and all together hit the renumber. It will renumber everything together. So it's one renumber, 50 banks, it doesn't care. Okay, hit the batch create, one batch create, 50 banks, creates all the batches together. Boom, go to your post. As you know, you can post them all there together. Also setting the ready to post flag. Okay, right, one post, all the banks, one post, and then of course one post to RecXpress, all the banks together. This suddenly makes your month end for multiple banks incredibly automated and much more, how would you say, you don't forget to post, for example. You don't forget, it does it for you across all the banks. Now, I would do 5 banks and forget to post 2 of them. And then I'd end up the next month, oh gosh, I haven't posted those banks. So this way, it does them all together, all at once, and it's a huge time saver, huge. In fact, it's become ridiculously quick now. So in the long years that we've been doing RecX from 2010, we've gone from a bank recon that used to take a week or 2 weeks down to a couple of hours in a day, and now finally, literally 1 hour in a day. So this is a huge automation process that's come to a pinnacle. I'm very proud of what we've got here. I think we've done a great job, and I'm hoping that you will be proud to install this at your clients, and you can walk out with a big smile and say, listen, guys, we've just cut down your workload to like literally an hour from a 2-week process. Okay, so on that little booster, Natalie, you can quickly show them how to set up the SFTP as well. I might interject every here and there, but go for it.
Okay, cool. So just like with the EFT, this all will correlate, not not in the screens, but you know when you do it. So the username again, this is your username for your SFTP connection, and in your bank setup screen for RecXpress, you will use the username that you have created in your Rebex setup. Then the same thing is authentication settings. You would keep this as required if you're doing an SFTP with key file. I think it can be enabled with SFTP with password. Yes, sorry, I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm actually talking about the password authentication. So SFTP with key file, the password can be optional. So Wayne, this is the password that you create when you use command prompt, or is this a password that you only create in Rebex? If you can clear that up.
Yeah, so the bank again will tell you that they want a single password, a key without a password, or a user with a password. So this would be what you're showing there is the key password, and if you're on two-factor, you would have to enter a user password as well, and that user password would be entered in the SFTP server software for that user as you set it up. Yeah.
Okay, great. Then we have just like with EFT, where we connect the public key that we created in the command prompt to Rebex, and you do that by selecting add public key, finding the key in your directory and linking it to your user. In the private key file name section in the RecXpress setup, that is where you then link your private key name, which is the key without the .pub extension. Same with EFT. This is where your SFTP user will where all the files will be sent to, and then you can specify this path in RecXpress in your settings by selecting a specific retrieve from SFTP directory. In our case, we have FTI/in, which I don't know if that's optional, Wayne, or is that also specified by the bank?
That's also specified by the bank.
Okay. So yeah, so the bank will specify the path that you need to create for your SFTP connection.
Let me interrupt again.
Yes.
Just go back quickly. Just go back
Go
quickly. So just to clarify, and so what you're doing is you on the left are telling it where you want to set up your SFTP path. Okay, and that path is basically just a path without a actual direct folder where they put the actual file. Okay, so you'll set up the path on the left, and then they will say within that path we want to have another folder called FTI/in, and we use that name for where we're going to put the statements, and they go all into the same path there. Now, most banks, just by the way, when they send up the file, they have a different name for each bank's file, or a very similar name, and then it's one or two things different, okay, in that file name, okay? And that file name is, for example, it will be called, let's just give an example, a simple one. Let's call it sample underscore CTAC underscore something else, a date or something, okay? Now, what you want to do is you want to then separate those files per bank. So what you do is you create a file matching pattern. And so if you've got a file that was called with the underscore CTAC in it, you'll say, right, this bank gets that pattern called CTAC. And they might upload multiple files, file underscore CCB underscore date, okay? And again, you'll put the pattern as CCB. And we then look at those files and we pick up the word CCB or pick up the word CTAC, and we know those statements are specific to those banks. Now, I know, for example, Nedbank have a hell of a name, and their name goes QB123, blah, 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 blah. It's a 30-character name. And in the middle of that name, it's got 001, 002. And those, I've got 4 current accounts, for example, there, and it'll be 001 will be the one current account, 002 will be the next current account, And they will say 001 is linked to 19 da 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 da. So I'll know to put as the file matching pattern 001. Okay, and that'll go to current account. 002 will go to salary account. 003 will go to private account. Okay, and that's what that matching pattern is. It's to separate each statement to each specific bank. Okay, cool. Okay, now before you move on, I notice you're going to go straight into something else. So let's just finish off what's in front of you. Okay, so what we do then is we retrieve the statement into another place. So we pick up the file from the SFTP and we put it into this retrieve directory. Okay, and it goes in there. We then use that file in the retrieve directory to actually bring it into the temporary file. It's all done in the background. You don't have to worry about it. Just I want you to know where it's going though, because you will then be able to look at your statements that's downloaded. After we've done the retrieve, it then goes into the archive. So we do the retrieve. So we fetch the file, we put it onto your machine, we retrieve it into our system. We then move it out of the retrieve into the archive. Okay, so all your statements for the last X years will be kept in the archive path. Okay, so if you want a history of your statements, you want to look at what you've retrieved 3 months later, you might find that you're missing something or you're not missing something. Was it archived? Yes or no? You'll find it in there. Okay, and we give an option for you to keep it in the archive. You don't have to, because we don't normally miss files, and I say normally, we don't miss files, and the bank doesn't miss files. It's processed in that manner. But if you want to keep an archive, I keep an archive. You can also create an archive path. Cool. I don't want to move on just yet. I want to ask questions. Any questions? I know it's a lot to absorb, but this is all a once-off setup. And by the way, we didn't mention in the previous slide, okay, the test connection button there is once you've done all of the setup, hit the test connection and it will test to make sure that you've got the correct setup working. Okay, and it will look for the SFTP path, pick it up, do a test, download, upload, whatever it needs to test, and come back and say it was either successful or not successful. Once it's done, you can move on. Okay, no questions. There won't be questions. I think you want to use this a bit, get to know it, and then you can come and ask questions whenever you're ready. Okay, cool. No questions. Cool. Right. Cool. And again, we have the same authentication. Yeah, sorry.
Same authentication, and then you update the user. Technically, that is the end of the presentation, Bob. We can go back, which is what we went through the other day, but I think everyone who's joined us today was in our last webinar.
Okay, yeah, we actually finished now doing the SFTP side of the system, and I've explained to you how it works in general. I've now realized we should have maybe given you another 10 minutes of how the actual RecXpress, because, okay, let's put it this way. The EFT side, there's nothing really more to know, except maybe that when you get the response file, you'll have maybe errors that'll go to an error batch, and you can go and print it in your source and in your posting journal error report. It gives you a detailed list of the errors, like, for example, invalid branch code, invalid account code, and you'll be able to see what went wrong there. Okay. Now, when you do the EFT with your bank, they give you a form to fill in. And on the form, you have what they call a percentage threshold. And that threshold is how many errors will you allow in the batch you send to the bank before it rejects the whole batch. And you can put 0. So as soon as it gets one error, it rejects the whole batch. But you could also put 1% or whatever. So like a batch of 100 entries, one entry rejection will cause an error batch for the one entry and post the rest. It's up to you to decide with your client what your threshold is. Okay. And like I said, what we do then is we pick up the return file and we create the necessary error batches. So there's not really any learning curve involved there at all. And maybe 5 minutes to say, when you post the batch, come back half an hour and post it from provisional. That could be maybe a learning curve. But when it comes to RecXpress, there is a bit more to learn. For example, when you do the retrieve, when would you do the actual fetch for the bank statement? Okay, We will add that to our next presentation. We can quickly do it now if you want. If you go, what's the time, Natalie?
It is 11. It's 11 o'clock.
Okay, 11 o'clock. It's up to you. It's really, it does need another 20 minutes, I think, or 15 minutes from our point. So what we'll do is we'll do another presentation, another webinar in the next couple of days, and we'll include that part for you. Maybe do that at the beginning. So if you've already done this, you don't have to go through this whole process again, and you can then leave the webinar once we've finished that process, and then don't have to waste your time. Okay, I don't think we have enough time today to do that.
Yeah.
But it's very self-explanatory doing it yourselves. Very. But you might want to tighten up a few questions and a few things. And maybe if you download your demos, we're generating them today, go in there, have a look at what it does, and join our next webinar with questions. And then you can come back and ask us a few more questions. Okay, so
also, just to mention,
on
I
that,
have created
yes.
that sample data, which I'm just refining the sample data and the documentation of how to use it. And with that, you can then create your SFTP connection and do a multiple import within RecXpress with SFTP.
Do me a favor, Natalie, just quickly,
Yes.
got 1 more minute. Just go back to the, I want you to go back to the RecXpress setup quickly, that the bank setup. I want to just show you one thing here. You haven't listed it here in detail, but if you do the location there, although we allow you, okay, you can obviously carry on RecX like you used to. Okay, so you don't have to go to SFTP, you can just import a batch. Okay, but what we've done is we've also allowed you to go to a local location. So if you had to drop down that location selection there, the
Should
first
I
one
jump
is
onto the
local.
server and show it?
Not necessarily, but let me just tell you.
Okay.
If you go local, you don't need to, don't worry. If you go local, okay, sounds like South Africa. If you go local, you can then put your import files into a local path, okay, and simulate the SFTP situation, where it will then go look in your local path, pick up a match, and bring those files into your temporary file. Okay, now Natalie set up sample data, which will be available later on today, where we've created 10 banks and 10 different import files. Okay, and we've allowed you then to copy those import files into your local path and then run the multiple retrieve. And that will simulate SFTP without the bank. Okay, no bank setup required. Okay, the beauty of that is you can then create your own SFTP simulation, bring in all those files in a multiple match grid, and see how that works. Okay, and work with a temporary file, etc. Other keywords created very in-depth help. Hit the F1 button, and you should be able to get all the information you need. Obviously, if you have questions, you can go on our forums and ask questions there. And I'd love it if you did that, because it'll be more information for more people. And we'll add those questions to our knowledge base and to our help. So if you download the sample data later, you can copy them into a local path. You can retrieve the files from a local path. They will go into the temporary file. You can then do a retrieve by date and go along from there. And there's a whole bunch of new stuff that we've added there that you can then look at, see what it does, and come back with questions. And we'd like to answer your questions in the forum. Don't waste time. Okay, so we try to cover as much as we can. Okay, if you want more, we're quite happy to do individual demos. We're quite happy to talk to your consultants if necessary. Set up half an hour together, an hour, do a bit more depth. But I really believe this is the future. We'll eventually have all the banks on here. If they're from Singapore, etc., we need the people from there to contact their banks, give me the information we need. We'll do it as quickly as possible. We're not going to be able to probably do it over Christmas as quickly as possible because we probably have a holiday, but definitely from the 1st of Jan, we'll go flat out to try and make sure everything's online for you and we can update banks as many as possible. Okay, but this is definitely the way to go with the clients. Much easier, much more simple to interface, much more consistent bank feeds. The file we're getting from the bank is specific. So we'll say to you that this is the file format you can choose in your RecX setup, and this is MT940 or it's proprietary file, and it's very specific to that bank. So we've got the right transaction codes, right descriptions. So it's much more finely tuned to the requirements of the clients, and within a year or so, we should have everybody just about working with the system. And finally, we're going to get Mike Stewart's going to come back to me with all the bank charges. I'm going to find out what the different bank charges are. I know that Nedbank, for example, charge half price for this type of process. That's interesting to find out. So you save money there. But really, and we still interface to Netcash, we interface still to other products with a similar interface like this. So really, this is going to be a much more streamlined and a much more efficient way of doing your payments and doing your reconciliations.